Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So today we're going to be talking about Madam Web. Did this card live up to the hype? Did it underperform? Is it worth your resources? And what are the decks it is finding success in? So, pre-release, you might remember, I was a little skeptical on this card. The effect, obviously incredibly powerful, but the stat line, not so much. Now, naturally, kind of the thing a lot of people expected to be the best Madam Web deck was going to be the traditional like bounce move stuff, where you're moving stuff around, you're bouncing it, you make a 80 power Human Torch, copy it, that kind of stuff. Or some people did it with Tribunal too. And that just wasn't good. Everything I have seen about that deck from players I know as very good players has showed me that that deck is bad. Maybe it's worse because of the Taskmaster nerf, but truthfully, I think even if we had 5-mana Taskmaster, that deck just seems way too fragile of a combo deck to kind of work consistently in this meta. And if you do want to play a fragile combo deck, I think there are just better options out there. So I feel a little vindicated there in that I do think this card was a bit overhyped pre-release. That being said, the card is good, and that doesn't surprise me a whole ton. I'm more so surprised by where it actually ends up being good, because some of those homes are not places I really expected it to show up. So in general, who is this card for? I think if you are a traditional move player, if you like playing Vulture, if you like playing Heimdall, if you like playing especially multiple man, I think this is a card for you. And I think you will not regret purchasing this card. And we'll take a look at some of the decks that utilize all these cards in a minute here. But I think in general, this is not a card that every player needs to go after, because the decks that it goes in are rather specific. I don't think this is a card that is just going to naturally be a quote-unquote good cards inclusion in a bunch of decks like other just generically powerful good static cards like, let's say, Copycat. And that's totally okay. Actually, I prefer cards like this that, they do require a bit more of building around in the deck building process, but they are absolutely core and very powerful for those strategies. So yeah, if you're a fan of the traditional move archetype, if you're a fan of some of the clogging decks, we're even seeing this pop up a little bit in Lockjaw stuff, those kind of decks, if those are your thing, if you really enjoy them, I think Madam Web is a very reasonable card to go after. And we'll briefly mention the other cards available in the spotlight here. Alioth, really, really good, arguably the best, if not one of the best 6-drops in the game right now. So if you do not have Alioth and you find Madam Web appealing for your playstyle, I think that makes this a very, very good week to open. And then Silk. Silk's a great card. I like Silk a lot, but her application is fairly niche right now, mainly showing up in some variations of the tempo move deck, as well as the 5 people still playing Cerebro 5. So if you don't have that and those appeal to you, that makes the week a little bit better, but I don't think Silk is as much of a card that would push you to open this week compared to things like Madam Web and Alioth. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the decks that have been proven to be successful with Madam Web in the short time since our release. Starting things out, we have a traditional Heimdall move deck, and I'll be the first one to say I have never enjoyed playing Heimdall move. It has never really been my thing. It is the common meme of Heimdall into lose, that's been around since the beginning of Marvel Snap, and though some players were pretty good at making the deck work in the past, it felt like you kind of had to play it perfectly, and even then, you would still lose a lot with it, while there was room for misplay if you made any small sequencing or decision errors. And while that is still a factor, you do still have to make smart plays and the correct plays, I find that this version of the traditional move deck has been fairly effective for me. And I've also really enjoyed playing it way more than I ever have with this archetype. And I think the main reason for this stems from the fact that making big multiple men is really fun and also really helps get rid of the downside that Heimdall naturally has, which is most of the time you are automatically forfeiting that right lane just by the nature of Heimdall moving all your cards to the left. making a big multiple man over on the right lane actually lets you contest that lane with Heimdall, because you get some additional stats there while you're moving all your other cards across the board to fight for 3 lanes. You can make some really, really big numbers with this deck. So we have 2 different ways of buffing up the multiple man with our Hulkbuster and Spider-Man. I think having 2 ways to buff this card is absolutely key. I could also see Aranya making a nice inclusion in this deck as well when she comes out, but for the time being, I think if you want to play traditional move, this is a really good way to do it. And Madam Web is absolutely a huge part of what is making that happen. Having a card that is just consistently enabling your move synergies, that you can move stuff out and then the same turn you can pull it back with something like Doctor Strange, Ghost Spider, or set up Cloak for the next turn, just really gives move something it's always needed in a way to consistently trigger its move effects without having to rely on just Heimdall at the end of the game or drawing one of your enablers like Ghost Spider or Iron Fist. I tried a few different versions of this list, even tried 2099 a little bit, but this is the one I have settled on as being my favorite and the one I have found the most success with in terms of the traditional move build. Now, I'm not saying this propels the move archetype up to tier 1 or anything, but I think this is a very reasonable deck to play, and if you like playing this archetype, it's the best it's ever felt to me personally. Next up, we have a more Clog-focused list. This one comes from KM Best, and I think it makes a lot of sense, just using Madam Web as a bit of a value tool here to justify some other powerful move cards like Dagger and Vulture. Dagger was already very good in these Clog-style lists, so adding Vulture for a bit more synergy and just having Madam Web give you a bit of flexibility in terms of where you're moving your cards around the board seems to be enough for this card to get decent value and contribute to the already pretty straightforward game plan of clogging up your opponent into cannonballing on 6 for the win. Naturally, this deck runs a bunch of different ways to clog the opponent, with White Widow and Green Goblin both comboing very well with Titania to lock down a lane that you can easily retrieve by bouncing the Titania back to your side on the final turn of the game. Beast gets us some additional value out of our strong on reveal effects, lets us double up on some of our move shenanigans with Dagger, and can even get us more Kate Bishop Hawkeye arrows. And then basically your closers end up being Cannonball or using the move stuff like Dagger and Vulture to put out a lot of points in a lane that isn't clogged up. If you're a fan of the Clog archetype at all and like using some move cards too, I think this is a really solid way to go with Madam Web. Another place I decided to try out this card in was Phoenix Force. So this is Jeet's list. He is a very accomplished Phoenix Force player, and he ran Doctor Strange in the web spot. So I figured, well, we'll try out Madam Web here because unlike the traditional versions of Phoenix Force, this one opts to have a big multiple man Heimdall shenanigans backup plan as opposed to the normal Nimrod one. And ultimately, I'm not overly convinced this is actually better than the Nimrod stuff, but I do think you can take people by surprise who are kind of expecting the traditional Nimrod lines when you can get them with a surprise Heimdall or an Goliath that they are not expecting. That being said, I don't actually know if Madam Web is really all that much better than Doctor Strange in this deck. I think they both kind of feel like side grades. There are situations where one is better than the other and vice versa, and Madam Web did totally fine here, but I don't think this is one of the decks where you absolutely need Madam Web to play it. You can get away with playing Doctor Strange, and in some cases he will still be even better. But I do think Aranya might actually be even better than both of those cards in that spot, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on this one when she comes out. But yeah, typical Phoenix Force shenanigans, you're probably used to what that does by now, but I do really like the multiple man multiplying stuff. It is just a lot better now that we have Symbiote Spidey as another way to consistently make a big multiple man. And playing this deck and enjoying that interaction is really what led me to trying out the first deck that I showcased with the traditional move stuff and being very pleasantly surprised by it. So I really do think there is something to this multiple man getting really big, making a bunch of copies kind of stuff. And then the last deck of the roundup here, we actually have a Lockjaw. This is one I was pretty surprised but happy to see. I believe this is KX4N's list. I saw it posted on Twitter. It was finding some success in the top 100. I've always been a big fan of Lockjaw, and Madam Web has some pretty interesting applications here. So basically, the idea with this being you can use Madam Web to pull your big stuff out of the Lockjaw lane into other lanes, or you could even pull Lockjaw out of the big stuff lane and then dump more stuff into it. This is a more teched out list, so it's running Killmonger because Killmonger is arguably the best tech card in the game right now. It just farms so many matchups. We have Psylocke to help get out our big fours a turn earlier, like Lockjaw and Beta Ray Bill. Bill and Thor for the hammer shenanigans, Jane to draw him, Doom, Red Hulk, and Magneto rounding out our big card suite. Kate Bishop gives us a thing to toss into the jaw while giving us more things to feed the jaw later on. Madam Web to move the stuff around, Wasp for more jaw food. Pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. I could see maybe wanting to put one more big card in this deck, but I'm not really sure what I would cut to do that. Like, I think every card in this deck serves a pretty valid purpose. Maybe if the metagame changes a bit and there are less 1-drops running around, I could see cutting Killmonger for another big threat, or maybe even another ramp piece like Jubilee. But I think in the context of the meta we're currently in, it makes a lot of sense to have this surprise Killmonger tech card that you can also very conveniently throw into the Lockjaw at the same time. This one definitely sends me back to the days of old Thanos, where you basically use the Mind Stone, put a bunch of stuff in the Lockjaw, move the Lockjaw out to start lockjawing another lane. So that is a kind of fun nostalgia trip for anyone who misses that very overpowered interaction from back in the day. 6-drops I think are definitely flexible in this deck. I like the ones chosen here, but you could also opt for something bigger like an Infinite. You could opt for an Odin if you want to do more hammer shenanigans. You could opt for a surprise Alioth to get one over on people, especially combo decks. I think in general, decks like this are fairly flexible in terms of what you can run for the payoff, but I think the rest of the core is just very solid regardless of which payoffs you choose to use. And that's going to wrap it up for our breakout Madam Web decks. So yeah, I think if you enjoy most of these decks showcased in this video, Madam Web is probably a rather good card to get. You can still play it in Move Bounce, but I do think that is probably weaker than a lot of the other stuff showcased here, though I'm sure some people are still able to make it work, and who knows, maybe it'll get a little bit better when the metagame is a bit less hostile towards it in terms of the tech cards people are running. Also, there are some weird bugs going on right now with Ghost Spider in particular, where I've seen reports of when people are bouncing her to the hand and then playing her again, sometimes she's just not pulling the right thing. Something in the last patch really messed stuff up with the order of a handful of cards. Ghost Spider is one of them, and it seems like when you bounce her, it also seems to be contributing to some of the bugs where she is not just doing the things she's supposed to be doing properly, so do be aware of that if you are going to try out a more bounce-focused version of the Madam Web decks. Also, a reminder that the OTA is going to be dropping today. If you haven't already seen that, put up a video yesterday talking about some general thoughts, but I'll be doing some OTA brewing both here and live on Twitch, so if you want to see some gameplay as the OTA starts to develop, definitely stay tuned for that soon. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you think about Madam Web in the comments below. Did you pick up this card? Do you like this card? Are you planning on it? Are you skipping it? I'd love to hear it. That's going to wrap it up for this video, though. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.